The sterile white walls of Riverside Medical Center felt like they were closing in on me as I sat across from Dr. Patricia Williams, watching her review the papers that could have changed my life forever. My hands trembled slightly as she looked up at me with kind eyes that held something I hadn't expected to see: understanding, not judgment. "Mrs. Jessa Harper," she said softly, setting down the commitment papers that my own daughter-in-law had filed against me. "I want you to know that after our extensive evaluation, I find no evidence whatsoever of mental incompetency or any condition that would warrant involuntary commitment." The relief that washed over me was overwhelming, but it was quickly replaced by a cold fury, as the full weight of what Rachel had attempted to do sank in. My son's wife had actually tried to have me declared mentally unfit, painting me as a confused, paranoid old woman who needed to be locked away. But as I sat there looking at Dr. Williams, I realized this moment was about to become the turning point that would expose everything Rachel had been hiding. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office at Harmony Gardens, casting a golden glow across the architectural drawings scattered across my mahogany desk. At 62, I had built something I was truly proud of: a landscape design company that had transformed the outdoor spaces of half the wealthy neighborhoods in Riverside, Missouri. The view from my office on Pine Street overlooked the downtown district I had watched grow and flourish over the past 2 decades, much like the gardens I created for my clients. I adjusted my reading glasses and took a sip of my morning coffee, black with just a touch of cream, as I reviewed the plans for the Henderson estate. The project was massive, a complete redesign of their 5-acre property, including a Japanese-inspired meditation garden, a children's play area with natural climbing structures, and an elaborate water feature that would serve as the centerpiece. It was the kind of project that reminded me why I loved what I did: creating spaces where families could grow and make memories together. My assistant Maria knocked gently on the door before entering with a stack of messages. "Good morning, Mrs. Harper. Your daughter Amy called about dinner this weekend, and the Riverside Garden Club confirmed your speaking engagement for next month." "Thank you, Maria. Any word from Marcus about bringing the kids by the office today?" I asked, referring to my son who had promised his 8-year-old daughter Sophie that she could see Grandma's secret garden, the rooftop demonstration space I had created above our building. Maria's expression shifted slightly. Actually, Rachel called instead. She said they wouldn't be able to make it today after all. Something about scheduling conflicts. I tried to hide my disappointment. This was the 3rd time in 2 weeks that plans with my son's family had been canceled at the last minute. Marcus and Rachel had been married for 10 years, and while our relationship had started off well enough, something had changed dramatically over the past year. Rachel had become increasingly cold and distant, often making excuses to keep the children away from me. When I asked Marcus about it, he would just shrug and say Rachel was going through a stressful time with her real estate career. The day passed quickly with client meetings and site visits. I loved getting my hands dirty, literally. Despite having a team of talented landscape architects and garden designers working for me, I still insisted on being involved in the hands-on aspects of major projects. There was something therapeutic about working with soil and plants, watching something beautiful grow from nothing more than careful planning and patient nurturing. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Around 4 o'clock, I was kneeling in the demonstration garden on our building's roof, showing a potential client how different varieties of hostas could create texture and depth in shaded areas, when Maria appeared at the garden entrance looking flustered. "Mrs. Harper, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there are some people here to see you. They say it's urgent." I brushed the soil from my hands and followed her downstairs, expecting to find a client with a landscaping emergency. Instead, I found 2 uniformed police officers standing in my lobby, along with a woman I didn't recognize, wearing a crisp navy suit and carrying a leather portfolio. "Mrs. Jessa Harper?" one of the officers asked. "Yes, that's me. How can I help you?" The woman in the suit stepped forward. "Mrs. Harper, my name is Sandra Mitchell. I'm a social worker with Riverside County. We've received some concerning reports about your mental state and behavior, and we need to escort you for a psychological evaluation." I felt the world tilt slightly on its axis. I'm sorry, what? There must be some mistake. Ma'am, we have documentation here that suggests you've been exhibiting signs of confusion, paranoia, and potentially dangerous behavior, Officer Thompson explained, his voice professionally neutral but not unkind. Your daughter-in-law, Rachel Harper, filed these reports expressing concern for your safety and the safety of others. The blood drained from my face. Rachel filed reports against me? Sandra Mitchell opened her portfolio and began reading from an official-looking document. According to Mrs. Rachel Harper, you've been making accusations against her, claiming she's trying to steal from you or harm you in some way. She states that you've become increasingly paranoid and suspicious, forgetting conversations and appointments. She's also reported that you've been found wandering around your property at odd hours, talking to yourself. I stood there in complete shock, my mind racing to process what I was hearing. Every single allegation was not only false, but seemed designed to paint me as mentally incompetent. The accusations about paranoia were particularly cruel, considering that my growing suspicions about Rachel's behavior toward me had apparently been well-founded. This is absolutely ridiculous, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I run a successful business, I'm in perfect health, and I've never exhibited any of the behaviors you're describing. Ma'am, we understand this is difficult, the second officer said, but we do need you to come with us for an evaluation. It's for everyone's safety, including your own. Maria stood behind the reception desk, looking absolutely bewildered. I could see several of my employees gathering in the background, their faces filled with confusion and concern. This was not only humiliating on a personal level, but it was happening in front of the business I had spent decades building. Can I at least call my lawyer? I asked. Of course, Sandra Mitchell replied. But the evaluation is mandatory at this point. The commitment order has been signed by a judge based on the evidence presented. My hands shook as I dialed my attorney, David Richardson, who had handled my business legal matters for years. When I explained the situation, his voice immediately became sharp and focused. Jessa, don't say anything more than absolutely necessary until I get there. I'm heading to Riverside Medical Center right now. This sounds like a setup, and I want to know exactly who's behind it and why. The ride to the hospital was surreal. I sat in the back of the police car, not under arrest but not exactly free either, watching the familiar streets of Riverside pass by the window. I had driven these same roads thousands of times, going to client meetings, picking up supplies, taking my grandchildren to the park. Now I was seeing them through the window of a police car, being taken for a psychological evaluation based on lies told by my son's wife. At the hospital, I was processed like any other patient being brought in for involuntary evaluation. They took my purse, my phone, and my jewelry, giving me a plastic hospital bracelet with my name and a number. The intake nurse was professional but brisk, asking me basic questions about my medical history while Sandra Mitchell sat nearby taking notes. Do you have any history of mental illness, Mrs. Harper? No. Are you currently taking any medications for anxiety, depression, or other psychological conditions? No. Have you ever been hospitalized for psychiatric reasons? Absolutely not. The questions continued for what felt like hours. Eventually, David arrived, his usually calm demeanor showing signs of the urgency he felt about my situation. He was a tall, distinguished man in his 50s, who had represented me through various business dealings and had become something of a friend over the years. Jessa, are you all right? He asked as soon as he was allowed to see me. I'm confused and angry, but I'm fine, I replied. David, Rachel is behind this. I don't understand why, but she's somehow convinced a judge that I'm mentally incompetent. David's jaw tightened. I've been making some calls. The commitment petition was filed 3 days ago, which means Rachel has been planning this for at least that long. She provided what appears to be a detailed account of incidents spanning several weeks, including statements from Marcus supporting her claims. The mention of my son's involvement felt like a physical blow. Marcus is part of this? According to the paperwork, he signed a statement corroborating Rachel's observations about your behavior. But Jessa, I've known you for 15 years. If you were having mental health issues, I would have noticed signs during our regular meetings about your business affairs. Your company's financial records are immaculate, your project management is flawless, and you've shown no signs of confusion or incompetency in any of our interactions. Dr. Patricia Williams entered the small consultation room where David and I had been talking. She was a woman probably in her early 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Her manner was calm and reassuring, which I appreciated given the circumstances. "Mrs. Harper, I'm Dr. Williams, and I'll be conducting your evaluation. I want you to know that I take these assessments very seriously, and I'm committed to being thorough and fair in my examination." "Thank you, doctor. I appreciate that more than you know. I've reviewed the petition filed against you, and I must say, some of the allegations are quite serious. However, I've also spoken with your attorney about your professional and personal history, and there seem to be some inconsistencies that I'd like to explore." Over the next several hours, Dr. Williams put me through a comprehensive evaluation. She tested my memory, my cognitive function, my ability to perform basic tasks and solve problems. She asked about my daily routines, my business responsibilities, my relationships with family and friends. She had me draw pictures, remember word sequences, perform mathematical calculations, and explain complex scenarios. Throughout the entire process, I felt increasingly confident that the truth would come out. Every test I passed easily, every question I answered clearly and logically. There was nothing wrong with my mental faculties, and any objective evaluation would prove that. "Mrs. Harper," Dr. Williams said after we had completed the formal testing portion, "I'd like to ask you some questions about your relationship with your daughter-in-law. The petition filed against you includes some very specific allegations about your interactions with Rachel Harper. Doctor, I won't deny that Rachel and I have had some tensions lately, but the idea that I've been paranoid or accusatory toward her is simply not true. If anything, I've been trying to understand why she's become so distant and hostile toward me. Can you give me some specific examples of these tensions?" I thought carefully before responding. "About 6 months ago, I noticed that Rachel had started making excuses to avoid family gatherings. When I would invite Marcus and the children over for dinner, she would often claim to have other plans or would say the children were too busy with activities. When I offered to help with things like driving the kids to school events or babysitting so they could have date nights, she would decline and make it clear that my help wasn't needed or wanted." Dr. Williams made notes as I spoke. "Did you ever ask Rachel directly about this change in behavior?" I tried to. The last time we had a real conversation about it was about 3 months ago. I asked her if I had done something to offend her, or if there was a problem I wasn't aware of. She became very defensive and told me I was imagining things, that nothing had changed. But clearly, something had changed dramatically. "And what about your son, Marcus? How has he responded to these tensions?" This was the part that hurt the most. Marcus has basically avoided the issue entirely. When I've tried to talk to him about Rachel's behavior toward me, he just says I'm being too sensitive, or that Rachel is under a lot of stress with work. He's never acknowledged that there's actually a problem, which has been incredibly frustrating. Dr. Williams leaned back in her chair, studying me thoughtfully. "Mrs. Harper, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Have you ever made accusations against Rachel about stealing from you or trying to harm you?" "Absolutely not. I've never accused her of stealing anything from me." "As for trying to harm me, well, I suppose filing false mental health allegations counts as trying to harm me, but I never suspected she would go this far until today." "What about the allegations that you've been found wandering your property at odd hours, talking to yourself?" I almost laughed despite the seriousness of the situation. "Doctor, I live on a 3-acre property overlooking Crystal Lake. I often walk around my grounds in the evening, especially during the growing season, checking on my gardens and planning new projects. I sometimes think out loud when I'm working through design problems, which might look like talking to myself to someone who doesn't understand what I'm doing. But wandering around confused? Never." Dr. Williams continued asking questions for another hour, covering everything from my daily routines to my business practices to my relationships with other family members and friends. She asked about my daughter Amy and her family, and I found myself becoming more animated as I described the close, healthy relationship I had with them. "My daughter Amy and I talk almost every day," I explained. "I'm very close with her husband Tom and their daughter Lily. I babysit Lily regularly, and Amy often asks for my advice about everything from career decisions to parenting questions." If I were showing signs of mental incompetency, Amy would certainly have noticed and been concerned. Has Amy expressed any concerns about your mental state recently? None whatsoever. In fact, she's been worried about how upset I've been over the situation with Marcus and Rachel. She's noticed that I've seemed stressed and sad about the growing distance from my son's family, but she's attributed it to their behavior, not to any problems with my mental health. As the evaluation continued, I began to feel more confident that Dr. Williams was seeing through Rachel's lies. Her questions were probing but fair, and she seemed genuinely interested in understanding the full picture rather than simply confirming the allegations that had been made against me. Mrs. Harper, I'd like to discuss your business operations. According to the information I have, you run a landscape design company. Can you tell me about your typical workday and responsibilities? I spent the next 20 minutes describing Harmony Gardens in detail. Our client base, our current projects, the staff management responsibilities I handled, the financial oversight required to run a successful business. Dr. Williams asked specific questions about project timelines, budget management, and client relationships, all of which I answered easily and thoroughly. Children over for dinner. She would often claim to have other plans, or would say the children were too busy with activities. When I offered to help with things like driving the kids to school events or babysitting so they could have date nights, she would decline and make it clear that my help wasn't needed or wanted. Dr. Williams made notes as I spoke. Did you ever ask Rachel directly about this change in behavior? I tried to. The last time we had a real conversation about it was about 3 months ago. I asked her if I had done something to offend her, or if there was a problem I wasn't aware of. She became very defensive and told me I was imagining things, that nothing had changed. But clearly, something had changed dramatically. And what about your son Marcus? How has he responded to these tensions? This was the part that hurt the most. Marcus has basically avoided the issue entirely. When I've tried to talk to him about Rachel's behavior toward me, he just says I'm being too sensitive, or that Rachel is under a lot of stress with work. He's never acknowledged that there's actually a problem, which has been incredibly frustrating. Dr. Williams leaned back in her chair, studying me thoughtfully. Mrs. Harper, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Have you ever made accusations against Rachel about stealing from you or trying to harm you? Absolutely not. I've never accused her of stealing anything from me. As for trying to harm me, well, I suppose filing false mental health allegations counts as trying to harm me, but I never suspected she would go this far until today. What about the allegations that you've been found wandering your property at odd hours, talking to yourself? I almost laughed, despite the seriousness of the situation. Doctor, I live on a 3-acre property overlooking Crystal Lake. I often walk around my grounds in the evening, especially during the growing season, checking on my gardens and planning new projects. I sometimes think out loud when I'm working through design problems, which might look like talking to myself to someone who doesn't understand what I'm doing. But wandering around confused? Never. Dr. Williams continued asking questions for another hour, covering everything from my daily routines to my business practices to my relationships with other family members and friends. She asked about my daughter Amy and her family, and I found myself becoming more animated as I described the close, healthy relationship I had with them. My daughter Amy and I talk almost every day, I explained. I'm very close with her husband Tom and their daughter Lily. I babysit Lily regularly, and Amy often asks for my advice about everything from career decisions to parenting questions. If I were showing signs of mental incompetency, Amy would certainly have noticed and been concerned. Has Amy expressed any concerns about your mental state recently? None whatsoever. In fact, she's been worried about how upset I've been over the situation with Marcus and Rachel. She's noticed that I've seemed stressed and sad about the growing distance from my son's family, but she's attributed it to their behavior, not to any problems with my mental health. As the evaluation continued, I began to feel more confident that Dr. Williams was seeing through Rachel's lies. Her questions were probing but fair, and she seemed genuinely interested in understanding the full picture, rather than simply confirming the allegations that had been made against me. Mrs. Harper, I'd like to discuss your business operations. According to the information I have, you run a landscape design company. Can you tell me about your typical workday and responsibilities? I spent the next 20 minutes describing Harmony Gardens in detail. our client base, our current projects, the staff management responsibilities I handled, the financial oversight required to run a successful business. Dr. Williams asked specific questions about project timelines, budget management, and client relationships, all of which I answered easily and thoroughly. Standpoint, the allegations made against Mrs. Harper are not supported by any evidence I can find. In fact, they appear to be fabrications designed to paint a picture of mental incompetency that simply doesn't exist. As Dr. Williams prepared my discharge paperwork, she made one final observation that would stay with me for a long time. Mrs. Harper, I want you to know that what happened to you today is unfortunately not as rare as it should be. Sometimes family members attempt to have relatives declared incompetent for reasons that have nothing to do with actual mental health concerns. It's a form of abuse that can be devastating for the victims. I'm glad we were able to establish the truth in your case. Walking out of Riverside Medical Center that evening felt like being reborn. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, and despite everything I had been through, I felt a sense of clarity and purpose that had been missing from my life for months. David drove me back to my car at the office, where Maria had waited anxiously for news about my situation. Several of my employees had also stayed late, concerned about what had happened to their boss. Their relief and support when I explained that the allegations had been proven false was incredibly touching. But as I drove home to my house on Lakeside Drive that night, I knew that my ordeal was far from over. The evaluation had cleared my name medically and legally, but it had also exposed the true nature of Rachel's feelings toward me. More troubling still was the realization that Marcus had supported her false allegations against his own mother. The question that haunted me as I pulled into my driveway was simple but painful. What was I going to do about the son and daughter-in-law who had just tried to have me locked away? The following morning arrived with a deceptive sense of normalcy. I woke up in my own bed, in my own home, surrounded by the familiar sounds of birds chirping outside my bedroom window and the gentle lapping of Crystal Lake against the shore. For a brief moment, the events of the previous day felt like a nightmare I had finally awakened from. Then reality crashed back down on me with crushing weight. I padded to the kitchen in my silk robe and made coffee with hands that still trembled slightly whenever I thought too hard about what Rachel had attempted to do to me. The morning light streaming through my French doors illuminated the gardens I had spent years cultivating, each plant chosen and placed with careful consideration. This was my sanctuary, the place where I had always felt most at peace, and yet now it felt tainted by the knowledge that someone had tried to use my love for these grounds against me, twisting my evening walks into evidence of mental instability. My phone had been buzzing incessantly since I turned it back on. Missed calls from Amy, from several clients who had heard through the grapevine about my situation, from Maria asking if I would be coming into the office today, but notably absent were any calls from Marcus or Rachel. The silence from my son felt like another slap in the face, a confirmation that he was either too ashamed to face what he had participated in, or too committed to Rachel's version of events to reach out to his own mother. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when I heard car doors slamming in my driveway. Through the kitchen window I could see Amy's silver Honda pulling up to the house, with her husband Tom getting out of the passenger side. My daughter had obviously dropped everything to come check on me the moment she heard what had happened. Amy burst through my front door without knocking, something she only did when she was extremely worried or upset. Her usually composed demeanor was completely shattered, her professional business attire wrinkled as if she had slept in it, her auburn hair pulled back in a messy ponytail instead of her typical polished style. "Mom!" she exclaimed, rushing across my living room to envelop me in a fierce hug. I couldn't believe it when David called me last night. I've been sick with worry. "How are you? Are you okay? What the hell is wrong with Rachel?" Tom followed behind her at a more measured pace, but his face showed the same concern and outrage that Amy's voice conveyed. At 45, Tom was one of the most level-headed people I knew, a successful architect who approached problems with calm logic and careful analysis. If he was visibly angry, the situation was even more serious than I had initially realized. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I assured Amy, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true, shaken up and confused. But the evaluation proved that there's absolutely nothing wrong with my mental state. "Of course there isn't," Amy said fiercely. Anyone who knows you would realize those allegations were complete garbage. You're one of the sharpest, most competent people I know. The idea that you're suffering from some kind of mental decline is laughable if it weren't so malicious. Tom settled into one of my armchairs, his expression thoughtful. Jessa, Amy and I have been talking about this all night, trying to figure out what could possibly motivate Rachel to take such an extreme step. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. According to what David told Amy, the paperwork was filed 3 days ago, which means this was planned and premeditated. That's what I keep coming back to, I admitted, sinking into my favorite spot on the sofa. The allegations were so specific and detailed, but also completely false. Someone put a lot of thought into creating a convincing narrative about my supposed mental decline. Amy began pacing around my living room, her agitation clear in every step. What I can't understand is how Marcus could go along with this. I mean, I know he's been distant lately, but to actually sign a statement supporting Rachel's claims? That's not the brother I grew up with. The pain in her voice when she mentioned Marcus echoed the ache in my own heart. Amy and Marcus had been close as children. Despite their 4-year age difference, she had always looked up to her big brother, and he had been protective of her throughout their childhood and teenage years. The idea that he could turn against his own mother was devastating to both of us. I've been thinking about that all night, I said slowly. Either Marcus genuinely believes there's something wrong with me, which seems impossible given how we've interacted recently, or Rachel has somehow convinced him to support her version of events. Neither possibility is particularly comforting. Tom leaned forward in his chair. There's a third possibility, Jessa. Marcus might be aware that the allegations are false but feels trapped into supporting Rachel for reasons we don't understand yet. You mean like she's threatened him somehow? Or manipulated him? Some people are incredibly skilled at psychological manipulation, especially when they're dealing with someone they live with and can influence on a daily basis. If Rachel has been systematically undermining Marcus's perception of his relationship with you, she might have convinced him that you're a threat to their marriage or their family. Amy stopped pacing and stared at her husband. You think Rachel sees Mom as some kind of obstacle that needs to be removed? I think Rachel might see Jessa as having too much influence over Marcus, or too much potential influence over the grandchildren. If she's trying to control every aspect of their family dynamic, having a strong, independent mother-in-law who has her own relationship with her son and grandchildren could feel threatening. The conversation was interrupted by my phone ringing. When I looked at the caller ID and saw that it was Marcus, my heart jumped into my throat. Amy and Tom both watched me anxiously as I debated whether to answer. It's your son, I told Amy unnecessarily. I don't know if I'm ready to talk to him yet. Answer it, Mom, Amy said firmly. You need to hear what he has to say for himself. I took a deep breath and accepted the call. Hello, Marcus? Mom, thank God you answered. His voice sounded strained and exhausted. I heard about what happened yesterday. Are you all right? The question struck me as almost absurdly inadequate given the circumstances. Am I all right? Marcus, your wife tried to have me committed to a psychiatric facility based on completely false allegations, and according to the paperwork, you supported her claims. So no, I'm not all right. There was a long pause before he responded. Mom, I need to explain. It's not what it looks like. Then please, by all means, explain it to me. Explain how you could sign a statement saying that your mother is mentally incompetent when you know perfectly well that's not true. Can I come over? This isn't a conversation I want to have over the phone. I looked at Amy, who was listening to every word with an expression of barely controlled fury. She shook her head emphatically. Marcus, I don't think that's a good idea right now. I'm still processing what happened, and I'm not sure I'm ready to see you face to face. Mom, please. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but there are things about this situation that you don't understand. Rachel isn't the person you think she is. This last statement caught my attention. What do you mean by that? I can't explain over the phone. There are things I need to tell you. Things I should have told you months ago. But I was scared. And I thought I could handle the situation on my own. Amy was gesturing frantically at me, clearly wanting to be part of this conversation. I put the call on speaker so she and Tom could hear both sides. Marcus, this is Amy. I'm here with Mom, and we're both trying to understand what the hell happened yesterday. Amy, I'm so glad you're there. Look, I know how this looks, but I need you both to know that I never intended for things to go this far. The commitment petition was Rachel's idea. and by the time I realized what she was actually planning, the paperwork had already been filed. Tom spoke up for the first time. "Marcus, this is Tom. With all due respect, you're an adult who signed legal documents making serious allegations against your mother. Whether it was Rachel's idea or not, you made a choice to participate in this. You're right, Tom, and I know how bad this looks. But if I had refused to sign those papers, Rachel threatened to take the kids and disappear. She said she would file for emergency custody and claimed that I was enabling an unstable family member who posed a danger to our children." The room fell silent as we all absorbed this information. If Marcus was telling the truth, then Rachel had essentially blackmailed him into participating in her scheme to have me committed. "Marcus," I said carefully, "are you saying that Rachel threatened to kidnap Sophie and Jake if you didn't support her allegations against me?" She didn't use the word kidnap, but yes, that's essentially what she threatened. She had already contacted a lawyer about emergency custody procedures, and she showed me research about grandparents' rights in cases involving mentally incompetent family members. She made it clear that if I didn't support her version of events, she would paint me as someone who is putting our children at risk by maintaining contact with an unstable grandmother. Amy sank into the chair next to me, her face pale. "Oh my God, Marcus, why didn't you call us? Why didn't you reach out for help instead of going along with this insane plan?" "Because I thought I could talk her out of it. I thought if I signed the initial paperwork, I would have time to convince her that Mom wasn't actually a threat and get her to withdraw the petition. I never imagined she would follow through with having Mom actually taken to the hospital." The pieces were starting to come together, but the picture they formed was even more disturbing than I had initially realized. Rachel hadn't just decided on a whim to have me committed. She had orchestrated an elaborate scheme that included manipulating and threatening my own son to ensure his cooperation. "Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me," I said. "Do you actually believe there's anything wrong with my mental state?" "No, Mom, absolutely not. You're as sharp and capable as you've ever been. The allegations Rachel made are completely false, and I knew they were false when I signed the paperwork." "Then why didn't you warn me? Why didn't you give me a chance to protect myself or seek legal advice before this happened?" "Because Rachel made me promise not to discuss it with anyone, and she was monitoring my phone calls and text messages. She said that if word got out about the commitment petition before it was executed, it would prove that I was working against her, and she would immediately file for emergency custody." Tom shook his head in disgust. "Marcus, that level of monitoring and control isn't normal marriage conflict. That's abuse." "I know that now," Marcus admitted quietly. "But it happened so gradually that I didn't recognize it at first. Rachel has been isolating me from friends and family for months, questioning every decision I make, monitoring my communications. I thought she was just going through a difficult period with her work stress, but looking back, I can see that this has been building for a long time." Amy reached over and took my hand. "Mom, this is even worse than we thought. Rachel wasn't just trying to have you committed, she was systematically destroying your relationship with Marcus and using the children as leverage to control his behavior." "The question now is what we do about it," I said, feeling a cold determination settling over me. "Rachel crossed a line yesterday that can't be uncrossed. She tried to have me locked away in a psychiatric facility based on lies, and she manipulated my son into participating in her scheme." "Marcus, where are you calling from?" Tom asked. "Are you at home with Rachel?" "No, I'm at work. After what happened yesterday, I told Rachel I needed some time to think. I stayed at a hotel last night." "Good," Amy said firmly, "because you need to understand that this situation is far from over. Rachel committed what amounts to fraud when she filed those false allegations, and there are going to be legal consequences." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked, though there was resignation in his voice as if he already suspected what Amy was referring to. "I mean that David Richardson is already talking about filing charges against Rachel for filing false reports and attempting to have someone committed under false pretenses. Depending on how far he decides to pursue this, Rachel could be looking at serious legal trouble." "And Marcus," I added, my voice harder than I intended, "you're going to have to decide which side you're on. You can't continue to enable Rachel's behavior and expect to maintain a relationship with the rest of your family." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Marcus alternately apologizing and trying to explain Rachel's behavior. By the time we ended the call, it was clear that my son was in an impossible situation, caught between a manipulative wife who had threatened to take his children and a family that he had betrayed by participating in her scheme. After Marcus hung up, the three of us sat in my living room in heavy silence. The morning sun had given way to overcast skies, and the atmosphere in the house felt as gray and oppressive as the weather outside. "So what do we do now?" Amy finally asked. "We make sure Rachel faces consequences for what she did," Tom said firmly, "and we help Marcus get out of what is obviously an abusive relationship." I nodded slowly. "But we also have to accept that Marcus made his own choices, even if he felt pressured into making them. He chose to sign those papers, chose not to warn me, chose to prioritize Rachel's threats over his mother's well-being." Amy squeezed my hand. "Mom, Marcus was being abused and manipulated. That doesn't excuse what he did, but it does explain it." "I understand that, sweetheart. But understanding something doesn't mean accepting it without consequences. Marcus needs to prove that he's willing to stand up to Rachel and protect his family, including me and his children, from her manipulation." Tom stood up and began pacing, his architectural mind clearly working through the problem like a complex design challenge. "The immediate priority has to be protecting Sophie and Jake. If Rachel is willing to file false commitment papers against you, there's no telling what she might do to maintain control over this situation." "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean, she might actually follow through on her threat to take the children and disappear. Or she might escalate to even more extreme measures if she feels like she's losing control of Marcus." Amy's face went pale. "You think she might hurt the kids?" "I don't think we can rule anything out at this point. Someone who's willing to have their children's grandmother falsely committed to a psychiatric facility is capable of pretty much anything." The rest of the morning was spent making phone calls and planning our next steps. David Richardson confirmed that he was already working on filing charges against Rachel, and he recommended that we also pursue a restraining order to prevent her from making any future false allegations or attempting to interfere with my business or personal life. Amy contacted her workplace to arrange for time off so she could help me navigate the legal proceedings and provide emotional support. Tom reached out to some of his contacts in family law to get recommendations for attorneys who specialized in custody cases, in case Marcus decided to file for divorce and fight for custody of his children. But perhaps the most important call I made was to Sophie and Jake's school. I explained to the principal that there was a family emergency, and that under no circumstances should Rachel be allowed to pick up the children or remove them from school without explicit permission from their father. The principal assured me that they would flag the children's files and require written authorization from Marcus for any changes to their normal pickup routine. By the time Amy and Tom left that afternoon, I felt like I had regained some sense of control over the situation. The initial shock and confusion of the previous day had given way to a clear-eyed determination to protect myself, my family, and my grandchildren from Rachel's manipulation and abuse. But as evening approached and I found myself alone in my house again, the full weight of what had happened began to settle on me. My own son had participated in a scheme to have me declared mentally incompetent. My daughter-in-law had fabricated detailed allegations about my behavior and mental state. My grandchildren were living in a household with a woman who was clearly unstable and potentially dangerous. I walked out onto my deck overlooking Crystal Lake, breathing in the cool evening air and trying to find some sense of peace in the familiar landscape. The water was calm, reflecting the last light of the setting sun, and the gardens I had spent years cultivating were beginning to show the first signs of spring growth. This view had always been my refuge, the place I came to think through problems and find clarity in difficult situations. Tonight it helped me understand something crucial. Rachel's attempt to have me committed wasn't just an attack on me personally. It was an attack on everything I had built, everything I represented. I was an independent woman who had created a successful business, maintained strong relationships with friends and family, and lived life on my own terms. To someone like Rachel, who apparently needed to control every aspect of her environment, I represented a threat to her ability to dominate my son and isolate him from outside influences. The realization brought with it a sense of liberation. This wasn't really about me at all. It was about Rachel's need for control and her fear of losing that control. Understanding her motivation didn't excuse her actions, but it did help me see the situation more clearly and plan my response accordingly. As I stood there watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky, I made a promise to myself. Rachel had tried to use the mental health system as a weapon against me, had tried to destroy my reputation and my freedom based on lies and manipulation. She had turned my own son against me and used my grandchildren as pawns in her scheme. But she had failed. The evaluation had cleared my name, exposed her lies, and revealed the true nature of her character to everyone involved. Now it was time for consequences, and I was going to make sure she faced every single one of them. The next morning brought news that would change everything. Maria called me at home before I had even finished my first cup of coffee, her voice tight with urgency. "Mrs. Harper, I'm sorry to call so early, but there's something you need to know. Rachel Harper was here at the office yesterday evening after you left." I felt my blood pressure spike immediately. "What do you mean she was here? Why?" "She came by around 7 o'clock, claiming that she needed to pick up some personal items you had asked her to retrieve. She had a key, which surprised our security guard, and she went straight to your office." "Maria, I never asked Rachel to retrieve anything from my office, and I certainly never gave her a key. How did she get in?" "That's what we're trying to figure out. The security footage shows her using what appears to be a legitimate key to enter through the main entrance. She was in your office for about 20 minutes before leaving with a small box." My hands began to shake as the implications of what Maria was telling me sank in. "Did anyone see what she took?" "The security guard tried to question her, but she claimed you had given her permission and that there was a family emergency. She seemed very confident and authoritative, so he didn't stop her. But Mrs. Harper, when I got in this morning, I noticed that your filing cabinet had been tampered with." "Which filing cabinet?" "The one where you keep your personal financial records and legal documents. The lock has been damaged, and several files appear to be missing." I sank into a kitchen chair, my mind racing through the potential consequences of what Rachel had done. That filing cabinet contained copies of my will, insurance policies, business partnership agreements, and detailed financial records. If she had taken those documents, she now had access to sensitive information about my assets, business operations, and estate planning. "Maria, I need you to call David Richardson immediately and have him meet me at the office. And call the police to report a break-in. I don't care that she used a key. She didn't have permission to be there, and she certainly didn't have permission to take my personal files." "Already done, Mrs. Harper. Mr. Richardson is on his way, and the police should be here within the hour." I hung up the phone and immediately called Amy to let her know about this latest development. Her reaction was immediate and explosive. "That crazy woman broke into your office and stole your personal files? Mom, this is getting completely out of control. What could she possibly want with your financial records?" "I don't know, but I'm sure we're about to find out," I replied grimly. "Amy, can you meet me at the office? I have a feeling this day is going to get much worse before it gets better." By the time I arrived at Harmony Gardens, the parking lot looked like a crime scene. 2 police cars were parked near the entrance, and I could see David Richardson's black BMW pulling in behind me. Maria met me at the front door, her usually composed demeanor clearly shaken by the morning's events. "The police have already started processing your office for evidence," she informed me as we walked through the building. "They found clear signs that the filing cabinet was forced open, and they're checking the security footage to get a better view of what Rachel actually took." Detective Sarah Morrison, a tall woman with graying hair and intelligent eyes, was waiting for me in my office. She had already photographed the damaged filing cabinet and was making notes about the scene when I entered. "Mrs. Harper, I understand you're the victim of yesterday's break-in," she said, extending her hand. "I've been briefed on your recent situation with the commitment petition, and I have to say this appears to be an escalation of harassment rather than a simple burglary." David Richardson arrived just as Detective Morrison was explaining their preliminary findings. His expression was grim as he surveyed the damage to my office. "Jessa, this changes everything," he said without preamble. "Breaking and entering, theft of legal documents, using your recent hospitalization as a cover story. Rachel has committed multiple felonies in the past 24 hours. What exactly did she take?" I asked, dreading the answer. Detective Morrison consulted her notes. Based on your assistant's description of what should have been in the filing cabinet, it appears that copies of your will, insurance policies, business contracts, and bank statements are missing. She also appears to have taken a small jewelry box from your desk drawer. The jewelry box detail hit me like a physical blow. That box contained the pearl earrings my mother had given me, along with a few other pieces of sentimental jewelry that had no significant monetary value, but were irreplaceable to me personally. Detective, the theft of those documents gives Rachel access to detailed information about my finances and business operations, David pointed out. Combined with the false commitment petition, this suggests a coordinated effort to gain control over Mrs. Harper's assets. That's our working theory as well, Detective Morrison agreed. We're treating this as part of an ongoing harassment campaign rather than isolated incidents. As the morning progressed and the investigation continued, a clearer picture began to emerge of Rachel's activities over the past several days. The security footage showed that she had been to my office building twice in the past week, apparently conducting surveillance to determine the best time to break in. She had also made inquiries with my bank about my accounts, claiming to be helping me organize my financial affairs due to my recent health issues. The bank manager, fortunately, had been suspicious of Rachel's requests and had refused to provide any information without my direct authorization. But the fact that she had even attempted to access my financial accounts suggested that her ultimate goal was to gain control over my money and assets. Mrs. Harper, Detective Morrison said as she prepared to leave, I want you to understand that Rachel Harper is now facing multiple felony charges: breaking and entering, theft, fraud, filing false police reports. We're looking at several years in prison if she's convicted on all counts. What about my grandchildren? I asked. They're living with someone who's clearly unstable and potentially dangerous. That's outside my jurisdiction, but I would recommend contacting Child Protective Services. Given the pattern of behavior we've documented, they may decide to conduct a welfare check on the children. After the police and David left, I spent the rest of the day with Maria, trying to assess the full extent of the damage to my office and business operations. The break-in had been traumatic for my entire staff, several of whom had worked for me for years and considered the office a safe, professional environment. But as disturbing as the break-in was, it had also provided something valuable: irrefutable evidence of Rachel's criminal behavior. The security footage, the damaged filing cabinet, the missing documents, it all painted a clear picture of someone who was willing to break the law to achieve her goals. That evening, as I sat in my living room reviewing the list of stolen documents with Amy, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Marcus's number, and I hesitated before answering. Our conversation that morning had been difficult enough. I wasn't sure I was ready for another confrontation. Mom, I just heard about the break-in at your office, Marcus said without preamble. I'm so sorry. I had no idea Rachel was planning something like that. Marcus, your wife stole my personal financial records and legal documents. She broke into my office and committed multiple felonies. This isn't just about the commitment petition anymore. This is about someone who's completely lost control. I know, and I'm horrified by what she's done. Mom, I need you to know that I had nothing to do with the break-in. I didn't even know she was planning it. Where is Rachel now? I asked. I don't know. She didn't come home last night and she's not answering her phone. I've been trying to reach her all day. Amy leaned toward the phone. Marcus, this is Amy. The police are looking for Rachel. She's facing multiple felony charges, and there's probably going to be a warrant issued for her arrest. I know. Detective Morrison called me this afternoon. She wanted to know if I knew where Rachel might be hiding. And do you? I asked. I honestly don't know. She could be at her sister's house in Springfield, Oregon. She might have gone to her parents' place in St. Louis. She has friends from college scattered around the state. There are a lot of places she could go. The conversation continued for another few minutes, with Marcus repeatedly apologizing for Rachel's behavior and promising to cooperate with the police investigation. But I could hear the strain in his voice, the exhaustion of someone who had been living with an unstable person and was finally beginning to understand the full extent of the damage. After we ended the call, Amy and I sat in contemplative silence. The events of the past 2 days had revealed the true nature of Rachel's character and the extent of her willingness to harm others to get what she wanted. But they had also exposed the weakness in Marcus that had allowed him to be manipulated and controlled. "Mom, I think we need to accept that this situation is going to get worse before it gets better," Amy said finally. "Rachel is obviously desperate now, and desperate people do unpredictable things." I nodded, feeling the weight of that truth settle over me. Rachel had already tried to have me committed, and had broken into my office to steal my personal documents. If she was willing to go that far, there was no telling what she might do next. But as I looked around my comfortable living room, surrounded by the books and artwork and memories I had collected over a lifetime, I felt a sense of determination rather than fear. Rachel had underestimated me when she tried to have me declared mentally incompetent. She had underestimated the legal system when she thought her false allegations would go unchallenged. And she was underestimating the consequences of her actions if she thought she could continue this campaign of harassment without facing serious repercussions. Whatever came next, I was ready for it. Rachel had started a war she couldn't win, and I was going to make sure she understood that before this was all over. The shrill sound of my phone ringing at 3 a.m. jolted me from a restless sleep. I fumbled for the device on my nightstand, my heart already racing with the certainty that middle-of-the-night calls never brought good news. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something compelled me to answer anyway. "Mrs. Harper? This is Officer Janet Collins with the Riverside Police Department. I'm sorry to wake you, but we have a situation involving your daughter-in-law, Rachel Harper." I sat up straighter in bed, instantly alert. "What kind of situation?" "Ma'am, Mrs. Harper was arrested approximately 2 hours ago at Springfield Memorial Hospital. She was attempting to have herself admitted to their psychiatric ward, claiming that family members were trying to harm her and that she needed protection." The irony wasn't lost on me. "Officer Collins, are you telling me that Rachel tried to have herself committed to avoid arrest?" "That appears to be the case, yes. However, the hospital staff became suspicious when her story kept changing, and they contacted us to verify her claims. When we ran her name through our system, we discovered the outstanding warrant for the charges related to your case." I rubbed my forehead, trying to process this latest development. "Is she in custody now?" "Yes, ma'am. She's being held at the Springfield County Jail, pending transfer back to Riverside for arraignment." "But Mrs. Harper? There's something else you need to know. When she was arrested, she had a significant amount of cash with her, along with what appear to be forged identification documents." This information sent a chill down my spine. "How much cash are we talking about?" "Nearly $15,000, all in small bills. She also had 3 different driver's licenses with her photo but different names, and what looked like fake Social Security cards." The implications of this discovery were staggering. Rachel hadn't just been planning to disappear. She had been preparing for it methodically, creating false identities and accumulating untraceable cash. If she had succeeded in taking Sophie and Jake with her, they might have vanished completely. "Officer Collins, does my son Marcus know about this arrest?" We called the emergency contact number we had on file, but there was no answer. We left a message explaining the situation. After ending the call with Officer Collins, I immediately dialed Marcus's number. It went straight to voicemail, which wasn't surprising given the hour, but I left a detailed message about Rachel's arrest and asked him to call me as soon as possible. Sleep was impossible after that call. I made a pot of coffee and sat on my deck watching the sunrise over Crystal Lake, trying to organize my thoughts about this latest revelation. Rachel's behavior had escalated far beyond what any of us had anticipated. The fake identification documents suggested a level of premeditation that was genuinely frightening. My phone rang again just after 7 a.m. This time it was Marcus, and he sounded completely shattered. "Mom, I just got your message about Rachel's arrest. I can't believe this is happening. I mean, I knew she was struggling, but fake IDs and $15,000 in cash? Where did she even get that kind of money?" "Marcus, that's exactly what I've been wondering. Have you checked your bank accounts, your credit cards, any savings or investments you might have shared?" There was a long pause before he responded. "Oh, God. Mom, I need to call you back. I'm going to check our accounts right now." 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time, Marcus sounded even worse than before. "She cleaned us out, Mom. Every account we shared, every credit card, she maxed them all out. She even took a cash advance against the mortgage on our house. In total, she stole almost $40,000 from our joint accounts." The scope of Rachel's deception was becoming clearer. She hadn't just been planning to disappear with the children. She had been systematically draining their financial resources to fund her escape plan. "Marcus, you need to contact your bank immediately and report the unauthorized transactions. You also need to call a divorce attorney and start protecting whatever assets you have left. I know, I can't believe this is my life right now. 2 days ago, I thought my biggest problem was marriage counseling. And now my wife is in jail for multiple felonies and theft. Where are Sophie and Jake right now?" I asked, suddenly realizing that with Rachel in custody and Marcus dealing with the financial fallout, my grandchildren might be left without proper supervision. "They're with me. I picked them up from school yesterday and told them Mom had to go away for a few days for work. I didn't know how to explain that their mother was planning to kidnap them." "You did the right thing protecting them, Marcus. But you're gonna have to tell them something closer to the truth eventually. Children are more perceptive than we give them credit for, and they're probably already sensing that something serious is wrong." "I know. I just need to figure out how to explain that their mother is mentally unstable without traumatizing them completely." Amy arrived at my house around noon, having heard about Rachel's arrest through David Richardson, who had been contacted by the police as my attorney of record. She brought lunch and a bottle of wine, correctly assuming that I would need both sustenance and stress relief after the morning's revelations. "Mom, this is insane," she said as we sat at my kitchen table picking at our sandwiches. "When I heard about the fake IDs and the stolen money, I couldn't believe it. This woman was planning to disappear completely and take those kids with her. What scares me the most is how close she came to succeeding," I admitted. "If she hadn't tried to have me committed first, if she had just taken the children and run, we might never have seen them again." "Do you think that was her original plan? To disappear with Sophie and Jake?" "I'm starting to think the commitment petition was her way of removing me as a potential obstacle. If I had been locked away in a psychiatric facility, there would have been one less person looking for the children if they disappeared." Amy shuddered at the thought. "That's absolutely diabolical. I mean, we knew Rachel was manipulative, but this level of planning and deception is something else entirely. The question now is what happens next. Rachel is obviously going to prison, but Marcus is going to need help rebuilding his life and taking care of the children. Are you willing to help him? After what he did by supporting Rachel's allegations against you?" It was a fair question, and one I had been wrestling with since learning about Rachel's arrest. Marcus had betrayed me in a very real way by signing the commitment papers, but it was becoming increasingly clear that he had been as much a victim of Rachel's manipulation as I had been. "I think Marcus was being abused, Amy. Maybe not physically, but certainly emotionally and psychologically. The monitoring of his communications, the threats about taking the children, the systematic isolation from family and friends, that's textbook abusive behavior. But he still chose to sign those papers against you instead of reaching out for help. Yes, he did. And there will have to be consequences for that choice. But I also think he's going to need support to recover from what Rachel did to him and to provide stability for Sophie and Jake." Our conversation was interrupted by a call from Detective Morrison, who had news about the ongoing investigation into Rachel's activities. "Mrs. Harper, we've made some significant discoveries in the past few hours that I thought you should know about. When we searched Rachel's car, we found copies of the documents she stole from your office. But we also found something else." "What did you find?" "A detailed plan for disappearing with the children. She had researched states with weak extradition laws, located schools that would enroll children without extensive documentation, and identified communities where she could blend in easily. She had been planning this for months. The systematic nature of Rachel's planning was chilling. This hadn't been a desperate impulse decision. It had been a carefully orchestrated scheme to steal my grandchildren and disappear forever. Detective Morrison, is there any indication that she was working with accomplices? This seems like too much for one person to plan and execute alone. We're looking into that possibility." The fake identification documents were professionally made, not something she could have created herself. We're working with federal authorities to trace where those documents came from. What about the money she stole from Marcus? Have you been able to track where all of it went? That's where things get interesting. We can account for about $25,000 of the $40,000 she took from their joint accounts. The missing $15,000 appears to have been converted to prepaid credit cards and gift cards, which would be virtually untraceable once she disappeared. After Detective Morrison hung up, Amy and I sat in stunned silence. The scope of Rachel's deception was overwhelming, and the realization of how close she had come to succeeding was terrifying. Mom, what if she had taken Sophie and Jake? What if we never saw them again? I don't want to think about that possibility, I said honestly, but it does make me realize how important it is that we support Marcus through this. Those children are going to need stability and love to recover from the trauma of having a mother who was planning to essentially kidnap them. That evening, Marcus called to ask if he could bring Sophie and Jake over for dinner. He sounded exhausted and overwhelmed, and I could hear the strain in his voice when he talked about trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy for the children. Of course you can come over, I told him. I'll make their favorite spaghetti and meatballs, and maybe we can all watch a movie together. Mom, I don't know how to thank you for being so understanding about all of this. I know I don't deserve your support after what I did. Marcus, we're family. That doesn't mean there won't be consequences for the choices you made. But it does mean we'll work through this together. When Marcus arrived with the children an hour later, I was struck by how much Sophie and Jake had changed in just the few days since Rachel's arrest. Both children seemed subdued and anxious, clinging to their father in a way that suggested they sensed the instability in their world, even if they didn't understand the details. Sophie, at 8 years old, had always been the more perceptive of the two children. She hugged me tightly when they arrived, but I could see questions in her eyes that she wasn't ready to ask yet. Grandma Jessa, Dad says Mom had to go away for work, but she didn't say goodbye to us, she said as we prepared dinner together. I looked at Marcus, who was helping 6-year-old Jake set the table, and saw the pain in his face as he listened to his daughter's confusion. Sometimes grown-ups have to make very quick decisions about work, sweetheart, I said carefully. The important thing is that you and Jake are safe and loved, and your dad is taking very good care of you. But when is she coming home? Sophie persisted. Marcus knelt down beside his daughter, taking her small hands in his. Sophie, Mom is going to be away for a long time. I know that's scary and confusing, but I want you to know that no matter what happens, you and Jake will always be safe and loved. Jake, who had been quietly arranging napkins on the table, looked up with the innocent curiosity of a 6-year-old. Is Mom sick? Is that why she had to go away? The question hung in the air as Marcus struggled with how to answer. How do you explain to young children that their mother is mentally unstable and was planning to kidnap them? Mom is having some problems that she needs help with, Marcus said finally. The most important thing for you to understand is that none of this is your fault, and you're going to stay right here with me and Grandma Jessa and Aunt Amy. During dinner, I watched my son interact with his children and saw glimpses of the man I had raised. Despite everything that had happened, despite the stress and trauma of the past few days, Marcus was trying to provide stability and reassurance for Sophie and Jake. It reminded me that while he had made terrible choices in supporting Rachel's lies about me, he was still a good father who loved his children. After dinner, while the children were watching a movie in the living room, Marcus and I sat on the deck overlooking the lake. The evening was peaceful, with a gentle breeze rippling the water and the sounds of night birds beginning their evening songs. Mom, I need to apologize to you properly, Marcus said, his voice heavy with emotion. Not just for signing those commitment papers, but for allowing Rachel to isolate me from you and Amy over the past year. I should have seen what she was doing, should have stood up to her manipulation. Marcus, I appreciate the apology and I accept it. But I need you to understand that rebuilding trust is going to take time. You chose to support Rachel's lies about my mental state rather than protecting your own mother. I know, and I'll regret that choice for the rest of my life. But Mom, I was scared. Rachel had convinced me that you were trying to turn the kids against her, that you were interfering in our marriage. She made me believe that supporting her version of events was the only way to protect my family. That's what abusers do, Marcus. They isolate their victims from support systems and create false narratives that justify their controlling behavior. I'm not excusing what you did, but I do understand that you were being manipulated. What happens now? I mean, with Rachel facing prison time and the kids needing stability, I don't know how to move forward. I had been thinking about this question all day. First, you focus on getting the children into counseling to help them process what's happened. Second, you start rebuilding your financial situation and figuring out how to manage as a single parent. And third, you work on repairing the relationships that Rachel damaged, starting with your family. Are you willing to help me with that? I know I don't have the right to ask for your support, but Sophie and Jake are going to need their grandmother's influence in their lives. I looked out at the lake, watching the last light of the day fade into darkness. I'm willing to help, Marcus, but on certain conditions. You have to be completely honest with me from now on, no matter how difficult the truth might be. You have to commit to family counseling so we can work through the damage that's been done. And you have to understand that earning back my trust is going to be a process, not a single conversation. I'll do whatever it takes, Mom. I just want my kids to have the stable, loving family they deserve. The following week brought a series of developments that would shape our family's future. Rachel was formally charged with multiple felonies, including fraud, theft, breaking and entering, and filing false police reports. Her bail was set at $100,000, which she couldn't afford given that she had already spent the money she had stolen. David Richardson also filed civil charges against Rachel for the damage to my business reputation and the emotional distress caused by her false allegations. While I wasn't interested in pursuing her for money she didn't have, I wanted to ensure that there was a legal record of the harm she had caused. Marcus filed for emergency divorce and full custody of the children, citing Rachel's criminal behavior and the evidence of her plan to kidnap Sophie and Jake. Given the circumstances, the family court judge granted him temporary sole custody and issued a restraining order, preventing Rachel from contacting the children. Perhaps most importantly, I had a long conversation with Sophie and Jake about their mother's situation. With the help of a child psychologist, we explained in age-appropriate terms that their mother had been making very poor choices that hurt people, and that she needed to face consequences for those choices. Sophie, with the wisdom that often surprises adults, asked the question that had been weighing on all our minds. "Grandma Jessa, does this mean Mom doesn't love us anymore?" "Sweetheart, your mother's problems don't have anything to do with how much she loves you," I assured her. "Sometimes people who love their children still make very bad decisions. The important thing is that you and Jake are safe and surrounded by people who will always put your well-being first." Jake, being younger, was more concerned with practical matters. "Can we still live in our house? And can I still play soccer?" "Yes, you can still live in your house with Dad, and yes, you can definitely still play soccer," Marcus assured him. "Some things are going to change, but the important things will stay the same." Over the next few weeks, I found myself spending more time with my grandchildren than I had in months. Marcus brought them over for dinner several times a week, and I started picking them up from school occasionally to give him time to handle the legal and financial aspects of his new situation as a single parent. It was during one of these afternoon visits that Sophie asked me the question I had been dreading but expecting. "Grandma Jessa, did Mom really try to have you put in a crazy hospital?" I had known this moment would come eventually. Despite our efforts to shield the children from the details of their mother's actions, they were bound to overhear conversations or piece together fragments of information. "Sophie, your mother made some very serious accusations about me that weren't true. She told some important people that I was confused and couldn't take care of myself, which wasn't true at all. But why would she lie about that?" It was the million-dollar question, and one I was still trying to fully understand myself. Sometimes when people are very scared or angry, they make choices that don't make sense to the rest of us. Your mother was dealing with problems in her own mind that made her think she needed to protect herself and you kids from people who weren't actually threatening her. Like you? Like me, yes. Even though I would never do anything to hurt you or Jake or even your mother. She convinced herself that I was dangerous. Sophie considered this carefully, her 8-year-old mind working through concepts that were difficult even for adults to process. Is that why she was going to take us away without telling Dad? I felt my heart skip a beat. If Sophie knew about Rachel's kidnapping plan, it meant the children had overheard more than we had realized. What do you know about that, sweetheart? I heard Dad talking on the phone to someone about how Mom had planned to take us on a trip without him. He sounded really scared when he was talking about it. I chose my words very carefully. Your mother was planning to take you and Jake away, yes. But she wasn't planning to tell your father or anyone else where you were going, which would have been very scary for all of us who love you. Would we have ever seen Dad again? Or you and Aunt Amy? I don't know, Sophie, that's part of what made your mother's plan so frightening. But the important thing is that it didn't happen. You're safe, and you're going to stay with people who love you and would never try to take you away from your family. That evening, after I had taken the children home to Marcus, I called Amy to discuss the conversation I'd had with Sophie. Mom, it sounds like those kids know more about what happened than we thought, Amy said. Maybe it would be better to tell them the whole truth, in age-appropriate language, rather than having them piece it together from overheard conversations. You're probably right. The child psychologist has been saying the same thing. She thinks that children often imagine scenarios that are worse than reality when they only have partial information. What about Marcus? How is he handling single parenthood while dealing with all the legal and financial mess? He's struggling, but he's managing. The good news is that he's finally seeing Rachel's behavior clearly, without her there to manipulate his perceptions. The bad news is that he's dealing with massive debt, legal bills, and the emotional trauma of realizing that his wife was planning to kidnap his children. Are you still planning to help him financially? It was a question I had been wrestling with for weeks. Marcus was facing significant financial hardship due to Rachel's theft and the legal costs associated with the divorce and custody proceedings. As his mother, I wanted to help. But I also remembered the lessons I had learned from the story I had read about Elaine Hampton and her struggles with enabling adult children. I'm going to help, but with very clear boundaries, I said finally. I'll contribute to the children's immediate needs, counseling, school expenses, basic living costs. But Marcus needs to take responsibility for rebuilding his financial situation and dealing with the debt Rachel created. That sounds reasonable. He needs to learn to stand on his own feet, especially if he's going to be a single parent. Exactly. And he needs to prove that he can make good decisions and prioritize his children's well-being over his own comfort or convenience. The conversation with Amy helped clarify my thinking about how to move forward with Marcus and the grandchildren. I loved them all and wanted to support them, but I also needed to establish boundaries that would prevent me from becoming an enabler rather than a helper. 2 weeks later, Rachel's preliminary hearing took place. Marcus asked if I would be willing to attend as a show of support for him and the children, and after some consideration, I agreed. I wanted to see Rachel face the consequences of her actions, but I also wanted to be there for my son as he navigated this difficult process. The woman who sat at the defendant's table bore little resemblance to the Rachel I had known for 10 years. Her usually perfect appearance was disheveled, her hair lank and unwashed, her clothing wrinkled and ill-fitting. But more than her physical appearance, it was her demeanor that struck me. She seemed smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of her actions and their consequences. When the prosecutor read the charges against her, multiple counts of fraud, theft, breaking and entering, filing false police reports, Rachel's face remained impassive. She showed no emotion, no remorse, no recognition of the harm she had caused. But when Marcus took the stand to testify about the impact of her actions on their family, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Whether it was anger, sadness, or something else entirely, I couldn't tell. But for a moment, the mask slipped, and I caught a glimpse of the woman who had been capable of such elaborate deception and manipulation. Marcus's testimony was heartbreaking. He described the systematic isolation from family and friends, the monitoring of his communications, the threats involving the children. He talked about the financial devastation caused by her theft and the emotional trauma the children were experiencing as a result of her actions. Your Honor, Marcus said in a voice that shook with emotion, my wife didn't just commit crimes against my mother and our family's finances. She violated the trust and safety that children need to feel secure in their world. My son and daughter may spend years in therapy trying to understand why their mother was planning to take them away from everyone they loved. When it was my turn to give a victim impact statement, I stood at the podium and looked directly at Rachel. She avoided eye contact, staring instead at her hands folded on the table in front of her. Your Honor, Rachel Harper didn't just try to have me falsely committed to a psychiatric facility. She attacked my professional reputation, my personal relationships, and my fundamental right to freedom. She stole documents that contained my most private financial information. But perhaps most importantly, she traumatized 2 innocent children by planning to separate them permanently from their father and extended family. I paused, gathering my thoughts before continuing. I don't know what motivated Rachel to take these actions, but I do know that the consequences extend far beyond the immediate victims. My grandchildren will grow up knowing that their mother was capable of planning to kidnap them. My son will have to rebuild his life and his ability to trust others. And I will always carry the knowledge that someone I welcomed into my family was willing to destroy me to achieve her goals. The judge listened to all the testimony with careful attention, asking clarifying questions and taking notes throughout the proceedings. When it came time to set bail and schedule the next hearing, she addressed Rachel directly. Ms. Harper, the charges against you are serious, and the evidence presented today suggests a pattern of calculated deception and criminal behavior. Given the nature of these crimes and the potential flight risk you represent, I am denying bail and remanding you to custody until trial. As Rachel was led away in handcuffs, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. There was satisfaction in seeing justice served, but also sadness for the family that had been destroyed by her choices. Most of all, I felt relief that this chapter was finally closing, and that we could begin the process of healing and rebuilding. Outside the courthouse, Marcus and I walked to our cars in silence. The weight of what we had just witnessed hung heavily between us, and I could see that he was struggling with conflicting emotions about the woman he had once loved enough to marry. Mom, I know this sounds strange, but I feel sorry for her, he said finally. Not sorry enough to excuse what she did, but sorry that she's so damaged that she thought these actions were necessary. That's not strange at all, Marcus. It shows that despite everything that's happened, you're still a compassionate person. But compassion doesn't mean enabling or excusing harmful behavior. I know. I think I'm finally starting to understand the difference. As we drove home from the courthouse that day, I reflected on how much had changed in just a few weeks. Rachel's attempt to have me committed had ultimately exposed her true character and freed my family from her manipulation. Marcus was beginning to rebuild his life as a single parent, and Sophie and Jake were slowly adjusting to their new reality with the help of counseling and the support of their extended family. Most importantly, I had learned that I was stronger than I had realized. When faced with Rachel's lies and manipulation, I had stood my ground, sought help from the right people, and ultimately prevailed. The experience had been traumatic, but it had also been empowering in a way I hadn't expected. That evening, as I sat on my deck watching the sunset over Crystal Lake, I felt a sense of peace that had been missing from my life for months. The immediate crisis was over, Rachel was in custody awaiting trial, and my family was beginning to heal. There would still be challenges ahead, helping the children process their trauma, supporting Marcus as he rebuilt his life, working through the remaining legal proceedings. But for the first time in weeks, I felt optimistic about the future. My phone buzzed with a text message from Sophie. Grandma Jessa, thank you for keeping us safe. I love you. Those simple words from my 8-year-old granddaughter reminded me of what really mattered. Not the money Rachel had stolen, not the reputation she had tried to destroy, not even the trauma of being falsely accused of mental incompetency. What mattered was family, love, and the relationships that provide meaning and joy in life. Rachel had tried to destroy those things, but she had failed. In the end, her attempts to tear our family apart had actually made us stronger and more connected than we had been before. It was a lesson I would carry with me for the rest of my life, and one I hoped would guide me as we continued to rebuild and move forward together. 6 months had passed since Rachel's sentencing to 5 years in state prison, and life had settled into a new rhythm that felt both foreign and comforting. The autumn leaves were turning brilliant shades of gold and crimson around Crystal Lake, and I found myself spending more time in my gardens, preparing them for the coming winter, while reflecting on how dramatically our family had transformed. Marcus had moved into a smaller house closer to mine, a modest 3-bedroom ranch that was within his budget as a single father. The downsizing had been difficult for him initially, as it represented the complete dismantling of the life he had built with Rachel, but I watched him gradually embrace the simplicity and authenticity of his new circumstances. There was something refreshing about seeing my son focus on what truly mattered, rather than maintaining the facade of prosperity that Rachel had demanded. Sophie and Jake had adjusted better than any of us had dared to hope. Dr. Patricia Morgan, the child psychologist they had been seeing, told me that children were often more resilient than adults when it came to recovering from trauma, provided they had consistent love and support. The children had that in abundance now, with Marcus stepping fully into his role as their primary parent, and me taking a much more active role in their daily lives. I had started picking them up from school twice a week, giving Marcus time to focus on rebuilding his landscaping business. He had decided to leave real estate entirely, saying that Rachel's manipulation had poisoned that career for him. Instead, he was working with me to learn the landscape design trade, something that had always interested him, but that Rachel had dismissed as beneath their social aspirations. "Grandma Jessa, look what I made in art class," Sophie announced one afternoon as she climbed into my car after school. She held up a watercolor painting of a garden filled with flowers in impossible shades of purple and pink. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. Tell me about all these different flowers you painted." "Well, these are supposed to be the roses like the ones in your garden, but I made them purple because I think purple is prettier than red. And these tall ones are supposed to be sunflowers, but I made them pink because that's Jake's favorite color now." Jake rolled his eyes from the back seat. "Pink is not my favorite color. I told you I like blue now." "Yesterday you said pink," Sophie insisted, with the absolute certainty of an 8-year-old. Listening to their normal sibling banter filled me with gratitude. There had been weeks after Rachel's arrest when both children had been unusually quiet, clinging to Marcus and me with an anxiety that broke my heart. Now seeing them argue about favorite colors felt like a small miracle of returned normalcy. "How about we stop by the nursery on the way home?" I suggested. "I'm thinking about planting some spring bulbs this weekend, and I could use some expert advisors to help me choose colors." "Can we plant them ourselves?" Jake asked eagerly. "Dad said maybe we could help you with garden work if you wanted. I would love your help. In fact, I've been thinking about creating a special section of the garden just for you and Sophie. You could each choose what you want to plant and take care of it yourselves." The idea excited both children immensely, and they spent the entire drive to the nursery debating the merits of various flowers and vegetables they might want to grow. Their enthusiasm reminded me of why I had fallen in love with gardening in the first place. The simple joy of nurturing something beautiful and watching it flourish under careful attention. At the nursery, we wandered through rows of bulbs and seedlings, while the children peppered me with questions about everything from soil composition to bloom schedules. Their curiosity was endless and infectious, and I found myself seeing my profession through their eyes, remembering the wonder and possibility that had first drawn me to landscape design. "Grandma Jessa," Sophie said as she carefully examined a package of tulip bulbs, "do you think Mom ever liked gardens?" The question caught me off guard. In the months since Rachel's imprisonment, the children had rarely mentioned her directly. Dr. Morgan had encouraged us to let them bring up their mother naturally, rather than forcing conversations about her, and we had all been following that guidance. "I think your mother appreciated beautiful things," I said carefully, "but she was always more interested in things that were already finished than in the process of growing and creating them. Like she wanted pretty flowers but didn't want to plant them? Something like that, yes." Jake picked up a packet of sunflower seeds, studying the picture on the front. "Dad says Mom made some really bad choices because she was sick in her brain. Is that true?" I knelt down, so I was at eye level with both children. "Your father is right that your mother was struggling with problems in her thinking that made her believe things that weren't true. But it's important for you to understand that having those problems doesn't excuse the choices she made." "What do you mean?" Sophie asked. "I mean that even when people are struggling with mental health issues, they still have to take responsibility for their actions. Your mother chose to do things that hurt people, even though there were other choices she could have made. Like she could have asked for help instead of trying to take us away? Exactly like that. There were people who would have helped her if she had been willing to accept help and be honest about her problems. The conversation continued as we selected bulbs and made plans for the children's garden sections. I was struck by how naturally they were processing their mother's actions and their new family structure. Children had a remarkable ability to adapt to new circumstances when they felt safe and loved, and both Sophie and Jake clearly felt secure in the life Marcus and I were building around them. That evening, after I had delivered the children home to Marcus, I found myself thinking about Rachel for the first time in weeks. During her trial, I had felt anger and betrayal, but now I mostly felt sadness for the woman who had been so consumed by her need for control that she had destroyed her own family. The children would grow up without their mother, not because of some unavoidable tragedy, but because she had chosen criminal behavior over getting help for her mental health issues. My phone rang, interrupting my reflections. It was Amy calling from her office, where she often worked late on complex financial analyses. "Mom, I just wanted to check in and see how things went with the kids today. Marcus mentioned that you were taking them to the nursery to pick out bulbs for their garden project." "It went wonderfully. They're so excited about having their own garden sections to manage. Sophie wants to plant everything in shades of purple, and Jake is determined to grow the tallest sunflowers in Missouri. That sounds perfect for them. I think having a project they can control and nurture is probably really therapeutic after everything they've been through." Amy was right, though I hadn't consciously thought of the garden project in therapeutic terms. But giving the children something positive to focus on, something they could influence through their own actions, was probably exactly what they needed. "How are things going with Marcus?" Amy asked. "Tom mentioned that he seems to be adjusting well to single parenthood and working with you on landscape projects." "He's doing better than I expected, honestly. I think removing Rachel from the situation eliminated a tremendous source of stress and confusion for him. He's able to focus on being a father and rebuilding his career without constantly second-guessing himself." "And how are you doing, Mom? I know you've taken on a lot more responsibility with the kids, and you're also training Marcus in the business. That's a significant load for someone who was recently accused of being mentally incompetent." I laughed at her ironic reference to Rachel's false allegations. "I'm doing well, actually. Better than I've felt in years. Having the children around more often has brought so much joy into my life, and working with Marcus has been surprisingly rewarding. I'd forgotten how much I enjoy teaching and mentoring. I'm glad to hear that. For a while there, I was worried that this whole situation was going to permanently damage your relationship with Marcus." "It could have, and there are still moments when I remember the betrayal I felt when he signed those commitment papers. But I've come to understand that he was as much a victim of Rachel's manipulation as I was, just in a different way." "That's very generous of you, Mom." "It's not generosity, Amy. It's pragmatism. Sophie and Jake need their father, and they need their grandmother. Holding on to anger and resentment would only hurt the children, and they've been hurt enough already." After ending the call with Amy, I walked out onto my deck and sat in my favorite chair overlooking the lake. The evening air was crisp with the promise of winter, and the water reflected the last light of the setting sun like a mirror. This view had always been my refuge, the place I came to think through problems and find perspective on difficult situations. 6 months ago, I had sat in this same chair feeling betrayed and confused, trying to understand how my own family could turn against me so completely. Now I realized that what had felt like betrayal had actually been the catalyst for positive changes that might never have happened otherwise. Marcus was a better father now than he had ever been when Rachel was part of the picture. Without her constant criticism and control, he had discovered his own parenting instincts and learned to trust his judgment about what was best for his children. He was also building a career that brought him genuine satisfaction rather than just social status and financial security. The children, despite the trauma they had experienced, were developing resilience and emotional intelligence that would serve them well throughout their lives. They had learned that actions have consequences, that honesty was essential in relationships, and that they were surrounded by adults who would protect them no matter what. and I had rediscovered parts of myself that had been dormant for years. Teaching Marcus about landscape design had reignited my passion for my profession in a way that pure business success never could. Spending time with Sophie and Jake had reminded me of the simple pleasures that made life meaningful. Most importantly, I had learned that I was stronger and more capable than I had ever realized. The following weekend brought the first hard frost of the season, signaling that it was time to plant the spring bulbs Sophie and Jake had chosen. Marcus arrived early Saturday morning with the children, hot chocolate and travel mugs, and genuine enthusiasm for the gardening project. "Okay, crew," I announced as we gathered in the backyard with our tools and bulb collections. "Today, we're planting promises." "What do you mean, Grandma?" Jake asked. "Well, when we plant these bulbs today, we're making a promise to the future. We're saying that come spring, when the world is waking up from winter, we want there to be beauty and new life in this spot." Sophie considered this seriously. "So we're planting them now, but they won't be beautiful until later?" "That's exactly right. Sometimes the most important work we do doesn't show results immediately. We have to trust that if we do our part now, good things will happen later." Marcus looked at me with an expression of understanding that went beyond gardening. I think he recognized the metaphor I was offering, that the work we were doing now to rebuild our family relationships and create stability for the children was like planting bulbs. The full beauty of what we were creating wouldn't be visible for some time, but if we tended it carefully, it would eventually flourish. We spent the morning digging holes, placing bulbs, and covering them with soil and mulch. The children threw themselves into the work with the wholehearted enthusiasm that only children could muster, getting dirt under their fingernails and smudges on their cheeks, while debating the proper spacing for daffodils versus crocuses. "Dad, do you think Mom would like our garden?" Sophie asked during a break, when we were sitting on my deck drinking more hot chocolate and admiring our morning's work. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him carefully considering his response. "I think your mother would be impressed by how hard you worked and how beautiful the garden will be in the spring," he said finally. "But the most important thing is that you and Jake like it, because you're the ones who did the work to create it." "Will we be able to show it to her someday?" Jake asked. "Maybe, son, but that's a decision we'll make when you're older and when you're ready. For now, the garden is something special that belongs to you and Sophie and Grandma Jessa." I was impressed by how Marcus handled the children's questions about their mother. He didn't dismiss their curiosity or their complicated feelings, but he also didn't make promises about a future reunion that might never happen. Instead, he focused on what they could control and what belonged to them in the present moment. That afternoon, while the children napped in my living room and Marcus reviewed some business proposals at my kitchen table, I found myself thinking about the concept of forgiveness. Not forgiveness in the sense of excusing harmful behavior or pretending that serious wrongs hadn't been committed, but forgiveness as a way of releasing the power that past hurts held over present happiness. I had forgiven Marcus not because he deserved it, but because holding on to anger was preventing me from fully enjoying the positive changes in our relationship. I had forgiven Rachel not because her actions were acceptable, but because carrying resentment toward her was poisoning my ability to focus on Sophie and Jake's needs. Most importantly, I had forgiven myself for the mistakes I had made in not recognizing the signs of Rachel's instability earlier, and for sometimes prioritizing peace over truth in family situations. "Mom," Marcus said quietly, looking up from the papers he was reviewing, "I've been thinking about something, and I wanted to run it by you. What's on your mind?" "I've been wondering if it would be appropriate for me to write a letter to Rachel. Not to resume contact or anything like that, but to let her know how the kids are doing and maybe provide some closure for all of us." I considered his question carefully. What would you hope to accomplish with a letter like that? I guess I want her to know that despite everything that happened, Sophie and Jake are thriving. And maybe I want to forgive her, not for her sake, but for mine. I'm tired of carrying anger around. Those sound like good motivations to me, but I would suggest running the idea past Dr. Morgan first, to make sure it wouldn't interfere with the children's healing process. That's a good point. I'll talk to her about it at our next session. Marcus, can I ask you something that I've been wondering about? Of course. Do you ever regret that Rachel is in prison? Do you ever wish things could have worked out differently? He was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the garden where his children had planted their promises for spring. "I regret that she made the choices she made," he said finally. "I regret that Sophie and Jake have to grow up knowing their mother committed crimes. But do I regret that she's in prison? No, Mom. I think prison might be the only place where she'll get the mental health treatment she needs, and I know the rest of us are safer with her there." That's a very mature way of looking at it. I've had a lot of time to think about it, and I've realized that loving someone doesn't mean enabling their destructive behavior or protecting them from the consequences of their actions. That evening, as Marcus was loading the sleeping children into his car to take them home, he paused at my front door. "Mom, I know I've said this before, but I want you to know how grateful I am for everything you've done for us. 6 months ago, I thought my life was over. Now I feel like I'm building something real and meaningful for the first time in years. You don't need to thank me, Marcus. We're family, and this is what families do for each other. No, I do need to thank you. Especially because I know you didn't have to forgive me for supporting Rachel's lies about you. You could have decided that I had chosen my side and cut me off completely. But then who would have suffered? You, me, and most of all, Sophie and Jake. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is choose healing over holding grudges." As I watched Marcus drive away with the children, I felt a deep sense of contentment. The past year had been the most challenging of my life, filled with betrayal, legal battles, and painful revelations about people I had trusted. But it had also been a year of growth, resilience, and the rediscovery of what truly mattered. Rachel's attempt to have me committed had backfired spectacularly, exposing her own instability and freeing our family from her toxic influence. What she had intended as my destruction had become the foundation for a stronger, more authentic family structure, built on honesty, mutual support, and genuine love. Standing in my living room, surrounded by the evidence of a day spent with my son and grandchildren, I realized that Rachel had given me an unexpected gift. By forcing me to defend my competency and fight for my freedom, she had reminded me of my own strength and resilience. By trying to destroy my family relationships, she had ultimately made them stronger and more precious than they had ever been before. The bulbs Sophie and Jake had planted that morning would sleep through the winter, gathering strength in the darkness until spring called them forth into the light. It was a perfect metaphor for where our family stood now. Having endured our own winter of crisis and confusion, we were poised to emerge into a brighter season of growth and renewal. As I prepared for bed that night, I found myself looking forward to spring with an anticipation I hadn't felt in years. Not just for the flowers that would bloom in our garden, but for the continued growth and healing that would unfold in our family. Rachel had tried to bury us, but like the bulbs sleeping in the soil outside my window, we had not only survived but were preparing to flourish in ways she could never have imagined. 2 years had transformed everything in ways I could never have imagined. That terrifying day when police officers escorted me to Riverside Medical Center. Standing in my flourishing garden on this warm spring morning, watching Sophie and Jake race between the flower beds they had planted and tended with such dedication, I marveled at how profoundly our lives had changed. The tulips and daffodils they had chosen as 8- and 6-year-olds were now magnificent displays of color, but the children themselves had grown in ways that took my breath away. Sophie, now 10, had developed a keen interest in botanical science and could identify dozens of plant species by their Latin names. Jake, at 8, had inherited his father's eye for design and spent hours sketching elaborate garden layouts that combined whimsy with surprising sophistication. Marcus appeared around the corner of the house, carrying a tray with fresh lemonade and wearing the confident smile of a man who had found his true calling. His landscape design business was thriving beyond our wildest expectations, with a waiting list of clients who specifically requested his naturalistic approach to outdoor spaces. More importantly, he had become the father Sophie and Jake deserved, present and engaged in their daily lives in ways that would have been impossible during his marriage to Rachel. "The Henderson project is officially complete," he announced, setting down the tray and pulling out his phone to show me photos. "They're over the moon with how everything turned out, and Mrs. Henderson has already referred 3 of her neighbors to us." I studied the images of the elaborate garden we had designed together, noting how Marcus had incorporated the children's suggestions for hidden pathways and secret reading nooks among the more sophisticated elements. It's beautiful work, son. You should be proud of what you've accomplished. We accomplished, Mom. I couldn't have built this business without everything you taught me about design principles and client relations. Sophie bounded over to us, her hands covered in soil from repotting seedlings. Grandma Jessa, look how big our tomato plants are getting. Jake thinks we'll have enough for a whole farmer's market by summer. I think you're both going to be amazed by your harvest this year, I replied, admiring their dedicated work in the vegetable section we had added to their garden area. The sound of a car in my driveway drew our attention, and I saw Amy's familiar sedan pulling up to the house. She emerged with a large wrapped package and the broad smile that always meant she had news to share. Perfect timing, she called out. I was hoping to catch everyone here together. My daughter looked radiant in a way that made my grandmother's intuition prickle with anticipation. She had been unusually secretive over the past few weeks, claiming work pressures prevented her from joining our regular family dinners, but maintaining an air of barely contained excitement whenever we spoke. What's in the mystery package? Marcus asked, wiping his hands on a garden towel. Well, I have some news that affects all of us, Amy said, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Tom and I have decided it's time for Lily to have a little brother or sister. The announcement sent the children into delighted squeals, while Marcus and I exchanged knowing looks. We had both suspected this news was coming, given the subtle changes in Amy's behavior and her husband's increasingly protective hovering during recent family gatherings. Lily is going to be such a wonderful big sister, I said, embracing my daughter warmly. When are you due? October, right in time for harvest season in the gardens, so this little one will grow up surrounded by the same natural beauty that shaped all of you. As we celebrated Amy's announcement with impromptu toasts of lemonade and excited planning for the nursery, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the family we had become. The crisis that had nearly destroyed us had ultimately revealed the strength of our bonds and our capacity for forgiveness and growth. Dr. Morgan had told us during one of our final family counseling sessions that trauma could either break families apart or forge them into something stronger than they had ever been before. We had chosen strength, chosen healing, chosen to build something beautiful from the ashes of what Rachel had tried to destroy. Mom, Marcus said quietly as the children showed Amy around their expanded garden areas. I got a letter from Rachel's counselor at the prison yesterday. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest at the mention of her name, though it was no longer the sharp pain of fresh betrayal. What did she want? Rachel has been participating in intensive therapy and wants to write letters of apology to you and the children. The counselor thinks it might be part of her genuine recovery, but she wanted our permission before allowing any contact. I considered this development carefully. In 2 years, we had heard nothing directly from Rachel except for the legal documents related to her conviction and Marcus's divorce proceedings. The children rarely mentioned her anymore, having built rich, stable lives, filled with school activities, friendships, and the security of knowing exactly who would be there for them each day. What do you think about it? I asked. I think I'm ready to hear what she has to say, if only to close that chapter completely. But I won't make any decisions about the children's involvement without talking to Dr. Morgan and to Sophie and Jake themselves. That sounds wise. And Marcus, whatever you decide, I'll support your choice. Amy rejoined our conversation, having finished admiring the children's gardening achievements. Sorry, I couldn't help overhearing. Are we talking about contact from Rachel? Potentially, Marcus replied, but nothing's decided yet. For what it's worth, Amy said, I think you've all grown strong enough to handle whatever she might have to say. 2 years ago, a letter from her might have been destabilizing. Now you're grounded in who you are and what you've built together. As afternoon melted into evening, our impromptu celebration evolved into an extended family dinner on my deck. The children helped prepare a meal from vegetables they had grown themselves, chattering excitedly about their aunt's pregnancy and making elaborate plans for teaching their new cousin about gardening. Watching Sophie and Jake move confidently through routines they had established in my kitchen, seeing Marcus's relaxed interaction with his sister and his children, observing the easy affection that flowed between all of us, I realized something profound had happened. We hadn't just recovered from Rachel's attempt to destroy our family. We had become better than we had ever been before. The false commitment petition that had seemed like such a catastrophe had actually been a gift in disguise. It had forced us to examine what really mattered, to prioritize authenticity over appearances, to choose love over control. Rachel's lies had inadvertently revealed the truth about who we were and who we wanted to be. As the sun set over Crystal Lake and the children finally succumbed to exhaustion from their day of gardening and celebration, I found myself thinking about the bulbs they had planted 2 springs ago. Those small promises buried in dark soil had become magnificent displays of beauty, just as our family's darkest moment had ultimately produced something more beautiful than what we had lost. Dr. Williams, the psychiatrist who had evaluated me that frightening day at the hospital, had been right about one thing. What happened to me was unfortunately not rare. But what made our story different was what we had chosen to do with the trauma. We had used it as fertilizer for growth, rather than allowing it to poison our relationships. Marcus drove the children home that night with promises to return the next day for more garden work. Amy lingered to help me clean up, and as we worked together in comfortable silence, I felt the deep contentment that comes from knowing you are exactly where you belong. "Mom," Amy said as she dried the last of the dinner plates, "I want you to know how proud I am of the way you handled everything with Rachel. You could have let it make you bitter or paranoid, but instead, you used it to become an even better version of yourself." "I had good examples," I replied, thinking of her unwavering support and Marcus's courage in rebuilding his life. Family isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up for each other when things get difficult. Standing alone on my deck after Amy left, I looked out over the gardens that held so many memories and promises. Tomorrow, Sophie and Jake would arrive with new seedlings they wanted to plant. Marcus would bring fresh ideas for expanding our landscape design business. Amy would share updates about her pregnancy and her plans for creating a child-friendly garden at her own home. Rachel's attempt to have me declared mentally incompetent and removed from my family's life had spectacularly backfired. Instead of destroying me, it had revealed my resilience. Instead of isolating me, it had brought my family closer together. Instead of ending my story, it had begun the most fulfilling chapter of my life. The doctor had been right that day in the hospital when she told me that Rachel's allegations were fabrications designed to paint a picture of mental incompetency that simply didn't exist. But more than that, the crisis had shown me capabilities I hadn't known I possessed, and relationships I hadn't fully appreciated. As I prepared to go inside for the night, I smiled at the irony of it all. Rachel had tried to convince the world that I was crazy, but in the end, she had helped me discover just how wonderfully sane, strong, and capable I truly was. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.